All right. It's great to see you all. I hope you're well rested, although to be honest, like it never happens. So, I hope so. You'll get your moments of rest, but this is a lifelong commitment. It's a lot of work, and you all know that. A few of the things I think that we're going to touch on today is just we've read a bunch of stuff and we haven't talked about all of it yet. There's still like anything remaining from the conference and the proceedings that you might have been able to see, and just kind of anything on your mind just about what we're trying to do. And I've got some things is generally about language revitalization. I think for the time being, what I'd like to do is spend Mondays talking about our readings and spend Wednesdays just actually looking at how to use stuff that helps us make things. So going through a variety of different tools, kind of a hands-on bit of a workshop, although some of it I might be just showing you some things, saying, if you want to get this software, go get it, but you don't have to have it. And then I'll show you some options too for things that are out there that might be free. So yeah, so we read some stuff, Ojibwe, Haida. We've read more stuff about Hawaii. Then we're looking at these reports and other handbooks coming out of First Voices in British Columbia. So one of the goals is just give you a bunch of stuff for your toolbox. Just say, this stuff is out there. This stuff is specifically for languages or regarding languages. And hopefully you had a chance to go through it all, because sometimes when we take a break, like it just depends. Like some people, like when you take a break, which is fine. But there is quite a bit of reading that we've done over these past few weeks. It's getting into the hundreds of pages. So I want to make sure, I know it's a lot, but this field these are the people who are making the moves. And I'm hoping that you'll have a good understanding of all this stuff. And hopefully in one of the Wednesday sessions coming up, I'm going to invite some folks from Hawaii to spend some time with us. And so hopefully that works out for them. I think they're 2 hours behind us now instead of 1. So yeah, anybody got any thoughts?
I was reading, I read the Ojibwe stuff, and then I read the BC stuff, and they used a quote from Hinton that I wanted to share as a way of supporting one another. Hinton said, "You are making a heroic commitment to a wonderful cause by working together to bring your language back out into the air where it belongs." And not only is it beautiful, but for our culture, it's true. It's true. It belongs back out in the air. And then with hot kill, it's really super hard to get in a master apprentice program because we have so very few speakers left. Aunt Dolores and her sister Jane and Aunt Phyllis, they're all in their 90s. And so it's really, really hard for us to get into a master apprentice program. But for those who can, I want to talk about their master apprentice chart. And if we, when we gain influency, eventually we will have apprentices. But so in the middle of the chart, there's a master speaker who's communicating with the apprentice. And the apprentice is speaking back, and there's no English allowed. It's only in the language. And then the outside of this oval of the master speaker and the apprentice speaker is things that they're going to do. And so it says language games, self-assessment, language demonstration, set language goals, set schedule, 50 hours a month, oral communication, daily activities, cultural knowledge, Hutlan, that's all.
How, yeah, so the master apprentice model is certainly, it was designed for languages that did have very few speakers left. And so I've heard a number of different sort of ideas on how to do this. That a lot of those languages do reach a phase where there are few, if any, masters left. And so the idea is that you have sort of this limited time. And so anybody here of where are your keys? Can anybody tell me what that is? Somebody tell me what it is.
Kusu Kakes.
Yeah.
I thought they're like through TPR, and then they make some games with the kiddos or the students, like it fully in language, and then it's like a little game that goes along with it.
Okay.
I've watched a couple of his videos where they're in a circle and you have no more than 4 items and you have a gesture for every aspect of the language, and then you practice trading off or the items so that you're getting to practice questioning, full sentences, first person, second, third person. And then he has a whole list of like different tips or games to play along with it.
Yeah, so it's developed by a team of folks, and Evan Gardner is one of the main folks in that sort of group. And it's a set of social tools and a philosophy, which is basically my understanding of it is you can use sign language and gestures to help supplement the need. So if you're going to create like these immersion environments, you have to give people a lot of tools to be able to communicate. And it's going to be up to you folks as teachers and advocates and program developers and managers, what you do and to what level. Just make sure that there's no one thing that does it. There's no, whether it's wear your keys or TPR or TPRS or Rosetta Stone, like there is this sort of mythology that there's this one thing that's going to do it. And that's simply not the case. But there's a lot of things that will help you get started and to initiate and sometimes maintain conversations. Like just getting people to converse. If people are conversing in your language, then it's safe. If they're not, then it's not. And so, but one thing that I really like that the Where Your Keys philosophy talked about was this idea of being very deliberate with your language planning in terms of what do you do when the people get together. So when the people gather, you have to be strategic. Like I like the idea of having it open for everybody, but that we're not starting at the beginning for everybody. But what we did, one of the last times we did have a language immersion gathering for Xinget, is we had one room for conversations and one room for lessons. And we said, go where you feel like you belong or you want to go. But when you're in the conversation part, don't expect any English. And we really tried to keep it a space without English. And so one of the things that we also tried to do, actually it's the cover of this slideshow. So I'll show you folks a picture. Was anybody that's in this class, or any of you here in Yakutat? I think this might be going back a few years. So there was a language gathering in Yakutat, and here's Evan. He's the wearer of your keys, kind of the brains behind the entity there. And I had heard about this philosophy that he had shared, which was if you have birth speakers who have high fluency, like that's the center of your whole universe. And then next out is your advanced second language learners, folks who could just be in the language with them the whole time. And then your intermediate folks, and then your beginning folks. And this isn't about who's the most important. This isn't about who gets the special privileges, but this is about how you decide to spend your time. So the most important thing is these birth speakers and then the folks who can understand them. Because these are all going to communicate a whole bunch of stuff with the language that once they're gone, you can't, there's so many questions to getting to the deep part of a language that you have to do a lot of that work. And then everybody who's kind of out here maybe just listens. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you're like a real beginner, then you certainly listen, but there should be spots. You know, I think a language immersion environment, if you're going to have one, some sort of community gathering, there should be at least 2 spaces. And then 1 space is, because sometimes you just need to go catch your breath and go do some lessons, and maybe even 3. That 3rd space would be a space of healing and just sort of thinking about your physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional health. But I really was thinking about this thing and what we could do, because this was, I think, 2014, maybe 15. Oops, maybe I froze. So this was 2014 or 15. And, you know, I would say almost half the folks right here are gone. And so when we think about what to do in these situations, I think the master apprentice model is great, but then there are other options as far as what you construct. And sometimes that means you have to take the next best thing, which is your advanced second language learners. And at some point it does turn over to them, you know, especially if you have critically endangered languages. That might be most of all that you have. And so you got to kind of do what you can with those. Other thoughts?
I had a question of rethinking. It was a couple weeks ago, so maybe it was covered, but looking at that article on questioning second language acquisition pedagogy and what would Indigenous language pedagogy be, and I kept wanting, like, oh, well, you know, the answers to it. There was one paragraph where they said, there's First Nations, Native American use of English, there's important meta-linguistic aspects, turn-taking, narrative pauses, narrative form, appropriate social speech requirements, geographical familiarity, and preeminence that are intricately associated with learning the ancestral language. And I was just curious whether there were, from your perspective, what pieces would really identify or separate looking at Indigenous language acquisition and the process of doing that compared to, you know, the second language acquisition process that that they shared in this article, if there were any key things that stood out.
Yeah, it's a great question. Whenever you like, let's say you look around the world and you say, okay, it looks like the ones who've done it have built their own school, right? It looks like that's what they did. They built a whole school around their language. But then if you read some of the stuff from Ojibwe and others that we've read this semester, some of them have said, well, we tried that and we burned ourselves out. And we tried that and we had to conform our language so much that it wasn't even we're just translating everything from English into our language. And so it's going to vary from place to place. There's a colleague of mine, and we were talking, and she says, "Oh, you write your language down? We don't write our language down. We don't record our language. We don't teach it to anybody who's not ethnically part of our group." And I was like, "Whoa!" And so everything's going to vary in those regards. But when I look at the model in Hawaii, which is the one I've studied most closely, it is a tremendous balancing act between, and so they kind of look at things in these two general spheres from my perspective, which was language and society, language and education. And so the language and society question is, how do you transform the society so that it uses its own language again? And it's a complex thing because you have the Indigenous society, you have, the only people in my life who ever told me to stop speaking Tlingit were Tlingit people, right? And so that there's something to that. And then, but in the same regards too, like how do you also create room? Because for a lot of the colonial systems, like they don't even realize that they've suffocated everything that's not them, right? Just to speak sort of abstractly about it. So in the language and education part is you're trying to figure out like what things do we protest? What things do we're fine with? What things do we go against? And what things do we just ignore? It seems like those are kind of your four options, right? Standardized testing, Hawaii says, we're ignoring that. That's our form of protest. We'll never, never take it. And I think the federal government just kind of understands that now. They just probably just don't even be like, okay, everybody has to do this. And then they just don't even look at the Hawaiian language schools, right? There's like, and, but they had a lot of advocacy as well. Bill Demmert was a Tlingit person. He was a scholar. He was the head of, he was way high up in the Department of Education. And so, but then you got to sort of figure out where are those things, because you're probably going to have to teach them how to use a computer, and probably going to have to teach them math and science and reading. But you could do all this stuff in a way that's distinctively culturally based to some extent, right? So if we're going to teach history, we got to figure out like what's the focal point of that? What's the viewpoint? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to talk about? Can we infuse all of our cultural values through all of this content? And then at some point, even in Hawaii, where they seem to have it all, once you hit 7th grade, you're reading all English textbooks after that, right? I mean, they have hundreds of years of written Hawaiian. So they have that, there were Hawaiian newspapers. At one point, the literacy in Hawaiian was among the highest in the whole world as far as having a literate population at their particular point in time. So they do have a lot of things that are going for them, but at some point you're going to run out of content. And then for languages that have, 4 or 5 speakers left and 4 or 5 people trying to do everything, it becomes a critical mass question as well. So sometimes that's where language policy and planning really comes into place. Like you really have to be on the ball with some of that stuff, which is what I like from the First Voices. It's really sort of, from my perspective, written for the people, because that's the other thing as well. Like, is this academics for academia's sake? Because I'm not interested in that at all. And people who are just, they just want to use bigger and bigger, fancier and fancier words just to sort of talk to themselves. Like that doesn't interest me at all. But if it's something that's really going to go and help and create change, then that's what I'm interested in. Anyone else, other thoughts?
I think that same article mentioned part of the problem with second language acquisition and learner models for Indigenous languages is that a lot of the times if the language is taught in the school, it stays in the school. And it reminded me of the MOOC, the massive open online course this summer. And it was kind of like pretty soon after the pandemic shutdowns and so many people came together, and yeah, it was over Zoom. But the cool thing about that to me was that you would see someone's screen and you would like see a whole family sitting on a couch together for the lesson. And I really liked that. I liked that the whole family would be learning together.
Yeah, so here I got a series of big questions for y'all today. Here's question number one, which I didn't even put in the chat yet. How do you move it from a language that you teach people to a language that is used? Somebody tell me.
In the home.
In the home.
Then my kids are like, probably like your kids, you guys' kids. They really want to see their friends and they want to hang out with them and they want to play on electronics all the time. And I told them, if you want to play on there, you can play for a little while, but you got to do all these different things like label things in the house, because we know what a lot of things are, but every day I'm like, you got to label 5 things, each of you and you. I'll help you look them up. We'll slap it on whatever you want, just so they know to reference that in the language. And that's something we should have been doing. I mean, we did before, and it's just kind of like they fell off. Got this cool sticker label thing.
Yeah, so there's this sort of, so like getting it back in the home. So the other thing too is like sort of lining up things in terms of like, okay, let's set a goal, right? And then so just some basics in terms of planning and processes, and then also sometimes attaching fundraising to it is, so like if our goal is to get the language in the home, then you say, okay, well, we're gonna make, then you set a target. So you say, by the fall, 10% of everything we say in our home will be in our target language, right? And then if you, and so there's ways that you could track that. It's a little complicated, but it might not be, you know, one person is in charge with a stopwatch or, you know, something. It's just sort of estimating or, you know, trying to sort of figure those things out. Or there's a specific set of time. Here's our 1 hour where like we're not allowed to use English in our home. Here's our, now we're going to do 2 hours, right? And so then you set some measurable sort of things. And then the other part of that is trying to figure out, yeah, like, so the old like carrot and the stick sort of thing. Like you want to get that horse to move, you got to sort of put something that it wants in front of it, like the Minecraft. And then sometimes you got to sort of hit it so it can go, but we're not gonna hit our kids with sticks, right? And so although when I was talking to people in Hawaii, I was like, y'all hit your kids? Like, yeah, we hit our kids. Give me that kalipa. So yeah, you gotta go get the slipper so you can go get hit with the slipper. But I talked to our elders, they say we don't hit our kids. But also like, so like what would the punishment be? But it's gotta be more complicated than that. It's nuance, right? So like one is like, you're gonna get this thing that you want if you do this thing. Like for my kids, like they just knew if they spoke Tlingit, then they could do it, right? So then my daughter, she didn't want to eat broccoli. I was like, "Good, ha!" And she says, and she holds it out to me. I was like, "Like, ha!" And she goes, "Nah, ye." So take it, it's yours. And she was like 2, so I was like, "Give me the dang broccoli." And so I ate it, right? But then there's got to be something like, how do we show them that what they're doing is the most valuable thing that they could ever do, right? So that's that other missing critical component. This is a complicated thing. Whoops, maybe I froze. So this is the critical component. This is a complicated thing called language prestige. How do we get our own people to value their language again? And that is, there's a hard reality behind that, which is they don't. And that's a very hard thing to say. It's a very hard sort of thing to realize. But I think the sooner you can realize that, you can sort of take some strategies to try and change that. So yeah, like for me, I want to make it the best place to be. I also want to sort of elevate people for being there and just hold them up high, but at the same time say, nobody's excluded. Just come on, just come on. Because there's so much devastation in Indigenous communities. I think once you start elevating people, then someone's over there and be like, they think they're better than us. Look at that. And then they'll call you all kinds of nasty names, right? And there's some real pain. There's some hurt there. There's a bunch of stuff to figure out. But behind all of this has to be this drive to get people to do it. And if you go to different communities where you see this is happening, they're having these same conversations, these same things. Like, you know, when I was talking to someone, he's like, what if we made a reality TV show about it? I was like, kind of laughing. And he's like, yeah, whoever like survives and speaks the most, they get like 50 grand or something. I was like, oh, whoa, now we're talking like some real money, right? But like, because here's this balancing act again. We're going to have to take our language and into capitalism and all these other kind of weird systems. And you got to be careful with that stuff too. Other thoughts? From a language that you teach to a language that you use. Strategies.
I keep thinking the TV, you know, that whatever's on TV or does have a sense of prestige as something that's important, because a lot of our families, that's the gathering place, right? That's the place where they're watching something. So I don't know. There was, when I was taking Spanish a long, long time ago, they had a program that came out of Annenberg Learner series where they created, it was called Destinos, but it was around, was it the Telenuevo, or, you know, the soap opera that's a huge, you know, genre, and had episodes. Each episode kind of focused on a certain learning, so it was very intentional about language learning, but they placed it in like a soap opera, knowing that that might have an appeal. So you got a little bit of the culture as well, you know, for somebody who has not ever experienced that kind of a soap opera, and then I think the narrator was formal language, and then the actual actors and actresses were informal. So you had you got to experience both, but in this, like, each week was a new, like, what's going to happen on Destinos, and you could watch it over and over again, and they had a booklet that you could practice with. And I just think, you know, I hear so often of how people learn English is by watching, you know, TV and putting the subtitles or the, you know, on it, and wondering whether there would be something that we could do similarly that would get people's attention and want to watch every week and could watch it over and over again to keep learning it.
Awesome. Yeah, I would love for that to happen. And I know a filmmaker, and he's just looking for stuff to do because his job, like, he gets to do it for a living, but it's a lot of stuff that he doesn't really like to do. And so he says, you know, I'm just looking for projects. And so what you end up doing is like sometimes pilot projects. So you come up with an idea and then you do it, and like you make up a sample, right? And then you try to sell that to folks and get it funded. So I do think, like, at the very least, a Southeast Alaska languages media network. So we're developing content for radio, television, short films, you know, funny stuff, serious stuff. I just think there's such a realm to explore there. And Oiwi TV, that grew with the Aha Punana Leo, and Maori TV with the Te Hangareo, so with their language nest over there. And so Gaelic has like whole programming that's on BBC. And so, like, I really think that this is a thing, and it would be so fun because, you know, like, but he's the same clan, and then like the music comes, right, and then it's like and so it'd be so, there's so much stuff we could do, and especially like the how over the top dramatic the soap operas are. But at the same time, and I see it's Hanjat, you're gonna go next, but someone who helped raise me was Julie Kitka, who was an incredible Alaska Native leader. And at one point I said, Julie, has anyone written a book about your life? Your life is so incredible and you're so quiet and humble. Could I write the book of your life? And she said, no, but I do want to write a series of, I want to write the Alaska Native political history as a series of romance novels, because I have seen some things. And I was like, oh, that is the greatest idea, you know. And so Sanjat. Okay, your hand is up.
Oh, sorry, I think you froze. Where you, my turn? Sorry. Okay. I am loving this conversation because I think that's one of the biggest puzzle pieces that I focus on is how do I take it from class out into the world and my house and my life and my kids and everything, my family, my extended family, everything. And I agree, it starts in the home. I totally agree. But then like with us being here in the program, all of my focus right now is into my own work. So I've kind of left, you know, and I see the effects that's having on my kids in the last few months. You know, I'm noticing the language is just going. It's, you know, I'm saying something now that they knew a few months ago, but now I'm like having to repeat it and do the actions and, you know, teach it all over again, I guess. So it does start at home, but then how do we take that next step, I guess is my answer or my question. How do we get our kids to conversate outside of the home and not feel awkward, like, oh, they don't know what I'm saying, I'm not going to say that, you know, or how do I get them to willing, even with my own self, I will talk to them in Haida and they don't respond to me in Haida, they'll respond in English. So I know they're comprehending, but I cannot get them to say the Haida to me unless we, you know, I'm not going to force it, but how do I get them to go ahead and go out to their friends and say, ja, you know, to their friends, instead of me prompting it and encouraging and teaching and all of that? Like how, like I agree. And I love what you said about that 10% goal and doing that. Cause what I do it, I didn't think about a percentage. So I love that. That's a new perspective, because what I do is I'll say, oh, I learned this new phrase today. I'm going to use this phrase as much as I can in one day. And then the whole week I'm going to try to, until the English, I never say the English for that phrase any longer. And I only say the hud kill. So I start in increments as well. But I guess my biggest next step to ask, you know, to everybody here, maybe they have advice too, but my kids don't want to respond in HUD kill, but they comprehend. That's the first step. And then also, how do I get them to willingly use HUD kill that they do know, even with people that may not know it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a $1 million question right there. And so with Hawaii, they just built a whole other universe, right? That's just what they did. And then the people who went, they went pretty much full speed. And oh, maybe I froze. Oh, I know I froze.
And then
oh,
he was talking to Siri on his phone, and he said, Siri, show me a picture of Whatsa. And Whatsa is like our word for like Bigfoot or something. So he's asking Siri. So little things like that, kids really do listen, and they take it with them wherever they go. One time we were in Safeway, and I called my son Baush a little monkey, and I said, Giddy Gad and Ax. And there was people that were Spanish speaking, and they were just staring at me. But I was telling my son to go grab me a water. And so, well, with Devin, I just push it and use as much language as I can with him. And he brings it with him.
Nice. Sorry, I totally just kicked off there. So great job. Just keeping things going. Keep things going if I freeze. It's not about me. Out it gone.
I'm just glad Skanja asked that question because I just like had kind of a tag on. Teenagers seem to be a really difficult age range. Also, I mean, besides like the normal difficulty, but like with like language, it seems like there's sort of a really noticeable level of like self-consciousness when they see like their younger peers learning that language, and they feel it's like they feel ripped off. Like with our oldest boys, it's like they just seem really like self-conscious about it, and like to the point where like our oldest has even like shed a couple tears, you know, and it's just so it's really like heartbreaking. And and I always like teeter on that line trying to figure out like what is okay and what's not okay for me to like, what do I say in this moment, especially as somebody who can't, it's not like I can relate, you know, and I try to be real about that front. You know, and how do you continue with that? Like, how do you get them to stick with it and not let it consume them that they didn't get to learn when they were 3? Because this, you know, this started up much later.
Yeah, these are very big questions. So I'm gonna try and like, we'll see if I freeze. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. So I was just talking to a lot of people just about language stuff, and I was working on my dissertation, and somebody shared a personal story with me, just to understand the level of heartbreak we're talking about here. So this person said, well, my sisters were quite a bit older than me and my brother. And so there was this age gap. And in that gap, the family decided not only would they stop speaking Tlingit to us, but they would prohibit people from speaking Tlingit to us. And so one day, my mom and dad were in the kitchen and they called me in there. And my mom said, son, get me a cup of coffee. Put some sugar in it. You know, I like that canned milk. Put that canned milk in it. Make me some toast. Put some butter on that toast, some jam. And sit down. Sit down. So he did everything he's told. When he sat down, his mom said, I thought I told your grandpa not to speak to you in Tlingit. And he said, no, he doesn't. He doesn't. And she said, well, I just said a whole bunch of stuff to you in Tlingit, and you did everything I said. How could you understand me? And he said, no, that was English, Mom. And his dad said, no, son, that was Tlingit. So his mom says, you go up there, you go get your grandpa. Tell him come down here. So he goes up, long walk to grandpa's house. Says, Mom wants to talk to you. She's real mad that you're speaking to me in Tlingit. His grandpa says, I told you, don't say anything. He says, I can't say anything. But they talked to me in Tlingit. I didn't know they were talking to me in Tlingit. I just understood everything. So they go down there, had a long talk, and his grandfather never spoke to him in Tlingit again. And he held all this anger and pain about what he lost as he was trying to bring his language back. So we have to look at those gaps, and we have to understand that there's these huge ruptures among our people when it comes to languages. And for our kids, like they're not going to necessarily have some of the psychological and emotional damage, but we're asking them to be different. When, for a lot of us, when we grew up, the goal was to not be different. Because I went to school, people make fun of the way Native people talk. People make fun of the way Native people look. And the teachers didn't stop this kind of stuff, so it was acceptable to do that. So now we're trying to nudge it in this other direction. And so I think there's a lot of things that are complicated with that. And to get them to talk is you know, that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. Like once we get that, we've got it. And I just remember so many times in Hawaii watching these kids just speaking Hawaiian. Like, you know, I studied that language so hard. Like, you know, I was feeling kind of good about my Hawaiian at one point. Then I spent a week in the school. And if you're there for more than 15 minutes, some kid's gonna start calling you uncle or auntie, and they start talking in Hawaiian. This kid, little kid, I'm in first grade class. Kids talk to me, I'm just like, say it again, say it again, say it again, say it again. Okay, your brother has the same laptop as me. Okay, you know, it took me so many tries to get, like, can't even talk with a 6-year-old. But these, and so if you build this environment though, it does work. But I think outside of building the whole school, I don't know. I don't, because, you know, my kids can understand. They don't speak. You know, they could speak quite a bit. I mean, they could tell you how to say stuff, or they could probably tell you if you're saying it wrong. But just in terms of like, just get them to do the day-to-day stuff, not quite there yet. So that's still something we're untangling. Ah, kach ansan.
I can't speak at all to the home life. You know, I don't, just from a teacher's perspective, and Jinkasi, we work together on this, is doing these badges. We started using Flipgrid and Seesaw as a way for kids to earn. It was a digital badge, like to show that what they know. And then one teacher said, "Oh, well, why don't you make them physical?" So each week or every 2 weeks, we have a new, you know, so this was to pronounce our school in Tlingit, Siti to Shanach. And then this was the tribal values. This is being able to say, how are you? And counting to 10. And then we've had some wonderful, like Crystal Whirl and Abel Ryan, and now Michaela Goad have allowed us to use some of their images. And it's been sweet here seeing family members helping their child do the recording. So like family members are learning along with them. And then one mom said that her kindergartner wouldn't take this off for like 3 days. She would wear it, and grandma and grandpa asked her, "Well, what is this?" And so it was kind of a conversation piece, because then she was wearing it and they'd say, "Well, what is this one for?" And so it was kind of a trigger for sharing what they knew, because they were earned badges. So I just, you know, something to share from a teacher's perspective of how what's being taught in school could maybe transfer over. Because even when we go back to face to face, I would love to keep doing this, because, you know, when we do our online, there's still kids like, you know, with their wearing their necklaces or showing them. They're just so proud. And anyway, I'm happy to share the badges that we've already created. We used a digital badger, so anybody in the world can, you know, click on to the video and practice. But we've been using Flipgrid. And then kids, it's like a social thing, right? Kids can then respond and say, "I love the way that you spoke," or they really end up talking about the frames. They get to pick different frames and be creative with their videos. But I found it's a great social way for them to then compliment each other on what they're doing.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I do think there's going to be some resistance to the idea, but I do like, for a long time, I've talked about this sort of like a special regalia or crest or design or jacket, something that the learners and the users get, right? And we're status people, we always have been. And so there are some challenges to bringing it into the language realm, because some people are gonna be like, you guys just trying to pat yourselves on the back. But like the reality is, like, we have to continue to make this like the best thing to do and the best place to be. And part of that is socially shifting those expectations. And also, what does this mean, right? Other thoughts? So from a language of learning to a language of use, right? So that's question number one. Question number two, how do you get more people to do it? Not just the kids, how do you just get more people, right?
Community involvement.
Awesome.
I tried to talk, I don't know, my brother's not going to watch this. I tried to get him to learn because he's an awesome artist, and I don't know how to just get him to learn or speak with. There's still a lot he's learning. He's got a lot of books, he's doing what he can when he can, but for him, it's like, he's got to work. Otherwise he doesn't have any money. And I tried to work with him to like say, send me the videos that you're making of like how you're making this ring, or whatever. Just send me the video and I'll work on the language for it. And then you can watch it while you're doing it. And then you can learn more of what's important to you. And he hasn't got me a video yet, but I'm sure he will. But I asked him too, like, why don't you want to learn more? And usually when I ask someone that, it's like, it's nothing. I don't get an answer, which I'm sure most people have. But it is a tough question.
I think there's what I think about a lot is like there's this problem of accessibility. Like, for me, what I know, it took a long time to learn, and it wasn't like just like there. Like I had to go purposely put myself in the position to learn what I've learned. And so like it's just like not everyone has the ability to do that. And so how do we make it more accessible to like give yourself time to even learn the language, which is like a whole other problem because capitalism forces us all to like sell our time. But and I think about this too, because like I just recently, so I've started, my mother asked me if I would do language lessons with the family. And so I started doing that this past weekend, and we had our first lesson, but it's like, I don't know. It's just like there's not a whole lot of access, I guess, is what I think about. Because, my family's lucky enough that they have me who they can be like, give us private lessons, essentially, almost, but like not everyone has folks like us in their circles.
Sheesh, duck juice.
The Ojibwe, they have events, and one is Quiz Bowl. And what's great about it is they have all these different subjects. And so, and the students get excited because there's elders there from, that might be from faraway towns that they would never see on a day-to-day basis. And it's their chance to interact with the elders. And so you get this intergenerational language learning going on. And then they create immersion environments and other events. But if you do community events that are fun and well advertised, people will show up and support you.
So I want to share this illustration with you folks. And so for me, like, this is a lot of what it comes down to in terms of like, just what are we trying to do? So here you have like a language, right? So sometimes you're trying to focus on fluency. So for me, like, how familiar is that language with an individual? How likely are they to understand what they're hearing and to be able to say what they would like to say? The other side of that is what we call the vernacular. And this means, what do people talk about on a day-to-day basis? And then how do you make the language be the medium for that? So these are some things like, because one of the things, as people start language nests and stuff, like I've heard sometimes they'll say, I'm gonna say this in English because I need you to understand it. I'm like, uh-oh, like that's not how it works. Like everything has to be through the language, chewing them out, you know, getting them to do the thing that they're supposed to do, teaching them the values, teaching them, yeah, all kinds of stuff, right? But then just the date, like what are people talking about? Right? Like what is everybody talking about? Because if you're talking about it, you should be able to do it in the language. What are you talking? Cut fish, winning a bingo, basketball, hiking, whatever the thing is, whatever music, whatever it is that needs to be done through the language. So that's likely to be a medium. Normalization. Somebody stopped me at Costco one time. Just said, "You speaking Clinky to your kids?" I had to follow you around because I needed to see if that's what was going on. And that shouldn't be, it just shouldn't be unusual. Like I was at Search one time. I was there with my kids and I was talking to them. And somebody else, she just turned and started talking to them in Clinket. Freaked them right out because it doesn't happen, right? They're just like, what? It's like a secret language with my dad, you know? And so like we got to move beyond that as well, just so that it's common. So how familiar is it with the landscape? Do we hear it? Do we see it? Do we encounter it? Like we just took a field trip to Haines. Not to put that community on blast, but we were talking about what normalization is, and I said, okay, go walk around this whole school. Tell me if you see any Tlingit language. And they didn't see any. Right? And so same thing, like wherever you are, like does the language exist on the land? Can you see it, hear it? Then reclamation. How are you going to take back these places? We used to do a whole bunch of stuff. We used to do everything in our language. So then you start strategizing, like, okay, we don't know how to cook in our language. We're going to start cooking in our language. We don't know how to play basketball in our language. We're going to start playing basketball in our language. We don't know how to flirt appropriately and take things however far we want to take them that way. We got to figure out how to do it in our language, right? And then this is the thing, is like the language goes everywhere. And this could be difficult. We had elders when we said, how do you say wipe your butt? And they said, we don't say that in our language. I was like, well, that's actually not true, you know? And so but then there's also being socially appropriate with everything, right? So it's a time and a place for all kinds of stuff. But surrounding all of this is ancestral guidance. You need help from the ancestors who had this whole language. Courage and determination. You need to not quit. You need to stay brave. You need to go out there, and sometimes you need to confront some of your own people. Sometimes confront people who are against you. You're going to need kindness and humility. So that those are very hard things to maintain. Because what if somebody's mean to you? You're going to be mean back? What if, you know, somebody does something and like, can you keep it from being about yourself, which can be really, really hard. And then love for yourself and love for your people. Like, I think those need to be foundational to what you're trying to do, because you're trying to like undo so much colonial violence and erasure, that I think that these things have to be sort of foundational to what you're trying to do. So like those, keeping some sort of central things in mind, and then developing some strategies. So like if the conversation is like, how do we just get our kids to talk? And like we saw it at the nest, these kids were talking, they were speaking in the language, and we didn't force them to. And in Hawaii, they built a whole school network. So it was a bigger deal just in terms of what they're trying to do, the scope of it. So they had sometimes things to just really encourage the kids by, they'd have big, huge ceremonies and put the kids up in front of it. I mean, those kids know that they're important. But then in the early days, they said, well, how does the language teacher's kids rebel against them? By speaking English. So, you know, Pila and Kawanoi, they talked about this stuff. Others did as well. When you become your child's teacher and that kid just stands up and keeps speaking English because they're being defiant to you, right? Those are challenging things. But Kawanoi said, like, what they used to do in their schools, they said, oh, you want to speak English? Okay. And they give them a National Geographic and say, here, handwrite this whole article, write the whole thing. And they'd have to write a whole article in English. Like that was their kind of punishment. Like, but now this is a strategy that they use. I saw it. So, and I also talked to them about it. So they made a number of songs that keep the kids in the language and that talk about, you know, you got to do so much to show that it has value. But then they give the kids toy money. Every kid gets a certain amount of toy money, right? And sort of like you get so many pennies and nickels and like everything has a set amount. So then if you get fined, like maybe the first time it's going to cost you $1, right? Let's just use dollars. But then you have 5 $1 bills. So if you get fined 5 times, then it's going to start costing $5. And then at the end of the week, whatever money they have left, there's a little store that they can go to and buy stuff. Right? So it's sort of it's a penalty incentive system combined. And we did this at language immersions before. Like if you wanted to use English, you had to put money in this jar. And so you could do stuff like that, where it's sort of like, we're going to give you something, but then you've got to use the language in order to keep it, or else you're going to lose a little bit of it. And so this is using some of the systems that exist to your advantage. Other thoughts? I'm fine. I know I got a couple other concepts.
Hello, Ryan.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sonia.
Oh, thank you. Goodness, cheese. I was just going to say this is a very good conversation. I'm really enjoying it because it made me think what is working in my own home. And it wasn't, like if I went and bought stuffed animals for my great granddaughter, every time she said a word, and then I thought about it some more, and I said, that's not how she started. She started because we told her how important it was to keep our language alive. And so now we are speaking more and more language in the home. But that question of what more can we do? Because if we stop here, it will just go away. And so really good questions. Thank you.
A few of us in intermediate who use photo journaling to learn how to express ourselves in the language. And when I think about like how to get people to speak, I think about how do I get myself to speak? And I think a lot of it is an emotional decision. Like it has to be tied to something I love to do. And so if I'm taking pictures of walking on the beach in the morning or shooting a friend, slashing the pow when we're snowboarding, and then I get to learn like how to say one sentence, and then I know I'll share that with my friends later when we get together on Zoom. I feel like that's been one in like a area where it's been beneficial that everything's digital and online, because it's so much easier to photo journal and you get to tie your language practice with something you love to do.
Sheesh. Let's see, I'll show you another one. It's been a while since I drew this and looked at it. But so one of the things that Pilo was talking to us about, he just do a lot of lectures, and then I would draw pictures of what sometimes he'd draw pictures on the board, and then I'd make illustrations of what I thought I was seeing and hearing. So he talked about this relationship between like these kind of 4 concepts that are totally interconnected. So you have language revitalization, which is the whole idea of like bringing the language back to a safe space so that we can, whenever we retire, we'd be like, okay, we did our job. The boat's afloat, it's still there. It's maybe in a better position, maybe than even when we inherited it. Not to say that we're better than anyone else, but we saw and we made some moves given the time and place where we were. So then they have another term. So ho'ola'olelo and kako'olelo would be language support. So what kinds of things are supporting the language revitalization movement, but might not even be a part of it? So it could be entities, right? Like Sealaska or Gold Belt or Tlingit and Haida, where like language revitalization is not their sole purpose, but they can certainly support it. So then they have Hanua Olelo Hawaii. So these are places where the Hawaiian language is used. The language has primacy, the language lives and breathes, it's the primary language of that place. And then they have these English language places. So for them, like a lot of the folks who are internal, like all of their lesson planning, all of their meetings, everything is carried out in Hawaiian when it comes to the school. But if they need to go sell these ideas to someone else, then they need to strategize how to do this for English. So they were talking about like marketing and branding your language, right? And so they do a lot of this stuff. There's t-shirts and other things that you can only get if you're in the program, right? And there's, again, like I have tried to sell this idea to our own people, and sometimes it gets shot down because they say, you're being exclusive. You're being exclusive. I said, no, I'm not. I just don't think you're hearing me. I'm saying, let's make it the best place. And let's also make sure that everybody knows that they should come. And they can, right? Because but I do think that that's a complication of colonial loss, is that I think for a lot of indigenous peoples, it feels like, here's one more thing I can't have, right? Like that's the reality of poverty. That's the reality of colonialism and having all your stuff taken from you. And then also having like your whole identity, like literally legislated. But then like, how do you get people who don't speak it to want to use it? How do you get them to do that? And how do you get people who really want to use it at a certain, like you got to get some people to the deep waters. You got to get some people with very high levels of fluency. You can't have everybody at this same kind of baby level. Like it's fine to have some folks there, get them in the shallows, right? Fun part of the pool, and you got to drag them in the deep water, right? So then, like just sort of thinking about this, like there's even stuff, like if we get this bottom stuff, like this is advanced Tlingit all the time. Like I'm like, I don't know, but we're gonna try and get there. I don't know this stuff, but we're gonna try and get there. And so you're gonna have like people telling you, you know, like we went to this one thing, and they're filming. They're doing they're doing like filming stuff all the time over there. They're Hawaiian media companies, like really big time. And so they were doing this filming thing, and so they were in there filming, and this guy's talking to us. So you found out we're students of the language program. He starts going off about like how they're speaking Hawaiian wrong. It's not like the old people. And when he said Kanaka, he said Kanaka, like the real hard, like a back. I was like, it's not like a Tlingit K. So I went and talked to some people after. I was like, oh, this guy says you guys doing it wrong. He said Kanaka. It sounds like, you know, like we make that K sound. And they said, who? And I said, there he is right there. And I said, he don't speak Hawaiian, you know? And so, but you're gonna like, how are you gonna weather all the criticism? You're gonna face so much criticism at every corner you take. You're saying it wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're changing the language. The language isn't supposed to be used for that. Like you're gonna get this stuff. And you have to be persistent and not let it shut you down. But you also have to be humble to know that you can't just do anything any old way, right? And then yeah, and so like if it sounds wrong, like how do you adjust people's language as they go along to continue to get them to use it, but not feel like, you know, if every time I use it someone corrects me, I'm probably going to stop at some point. So I think you have to have a strategy for corrections, and you have to have a strategy for creating safe use areas. And then, you know, and so like this was fun stuff. And so I'm hoping to get Pila come talk with us, and maybe a couple other guys who are over there. Okay, let me see what other questions I know I got some other big questions for you folks. Here's my next big question. So one time I was pitching this idea of a language medium school. and someone said, well, aren't the schools what took your language away from you? Why would the schools be a place to get your language back? Wouldn't you want to just do it in the home, do it in the streets? What do you think? Related question. Can a language be revitalized using a university?
I'll take a jump at this real quick. I say yes to all the above. I say yes. I mean, that's how English became effective. Every single aspect of the life became English. The home, the school, the work, the everything. Do not use your language or you will be punished in any aspect of your life, not just school. So the parents stopped teaching the kids because the kids would get punished. So, I mean, it was effective in more than just the school. It went into the homes, it went everywhere. So I say, yes, I think the language should be everywhere, in every school and every university, any path, like Haidas, you want to learn Haida language, go to the Haida University, go to the Haida High School, go to the Haida Middle School, go to the Haida Preschool, like it doesn't have to be one or the other. I don't think it could be all of it. It could be anything we want it to be, I think. But I think the biggest problem is that it's not in the school. It's not in the university. It's not in the home. So we just need to infiltrate all these places, like go everywhere, do them all, put the language in all the places, all of them. I don't know. That's my little stab at it.
How, other thoughts?
I think it should be, I was in it was a TCLL for like the parents thing they were doing, and they were talking about how they are going to expand it off in the middle school, so it's K through 8th grade in TCLL, and I think you still need a lot more teachers. There's jobs everywhere that need Tlingit speakers in the classroom posted every year, which there will be a lot, but I think it's definitely got to be in school, like every grade level. And then when they go home, we got these Tlingit encouragement phrase posters from the Language Nest, and they're awesome. Like 3 big ones hanging around, things they could use all the time.
Okay. Next question. Can you revitalize the language without revitalizing the culture? And can you revitalize the culture without revitalizing the language? And how do those things relate? Now let's go on mute.
I can only speak on my observations of my children, but it's been my experience through watching that I don't feel like you could do one without the other. It seems like one is contingent or supportive, at least, of the other. And so we implement them both harmoniously. It just seems, I don't know, just seems really weird to try to do language without culture. Doesn't feel right.
I agree for sure. It would be optimal to be able to always have those two tied together, but it certainly the availability of that hasn't caught up from what a lot of I've seen. You've got a lot of dance groups where people are dancing and singing the songs and then retroactively learning what they're singing sometimes and things like that. So I think the availability of being able to tie those two together, yes, of course, should be the ultimate goal anytime it's possible. But if it's not up to speed, like with arts and things like that, where there's language missing, then doing as much as you can to keep the culture revitalization strong as well, for when the language teaching methods to express everything we need to catches up. That's just, of course they should be equal and hand in hand, but in the meantime, I don't think either one should be restricted from lack of connection current connection to the other, because those bridges are going to get rebuilt. So that's.
I think, yeah, this is a little bit of a weighted question. I feel like, I think, and when there's a weighted question, you try to play devil's advocate and argue the opposite. I think they could. I mean, you could probably learn the language without the culture, and you could probably learn the culture without the language. But then it goes to the question of why. Like, why would you want to do that? So, I think it's technically possible, and I think both. There's some reclamation to both that needs to happen. So why not do it at the same time, especially if learning one and the other support each other and strengthen the learning process. So there's no reason not to, is sort of the thing. But I think technically you could probably learn the language and be like, oh, I've never even been to Alaska or something like possibly, or know anything about being Tlingit or whatever. Or you can learn entirely about the culture without ever learning a word. But I think it's more of a question on why would you want to do that when you have the opportunity to strengthen both learning processes through learning them at the same time, because they go hand in hand and you get a deeper understanding of each.
Yeah, I like to talk about these things because like I had read this one sort of text that talked about like the culture and the language are connected, but they're kind of somewhat disconnected in some regards, especially because you have so few speakers now, but then you have so much cultural stuff that still does go on. But some of the stuff, you know, like it's very hard to find the terminology for chokat weaving and for carving and, you know, just like stuff that seems pretty foundational to what we do. And so like the language has been lost, but it's a realm sort of question, right? So it's a domain question. But then I was reading this sort of one article and it says like, it's a lot easier to learn how to sing and dance than it is to speak a language. And so I used to sort of sometimes frown, like, you know, like people like to yell hoo-ha, like in this area. And like I was at a thing and we're going to raise a totem pole and everyone kept yelling hoo-ha. And I was like, can we like say something? Can we say words? And, you know, and I was trying not to sort of like shame anybody for what they're doing. And it's you never want to embarrass people. You never want to make them feel bad. But it's a bit of a balancing act as well. But then as I was talking with folks in Hawaii, they said, no. People love hula. And then the hula leads them to like, oh, well, what is that? And then it opens the door to interest in the language. And so, but I think you've got to be strategic with your ideas of this stuff. And then also we're all of our cultures are probably going through this big transition where the folks who know the most about the culture actually might not be speakers of the language. And then the people who know a lot about the language might not know very, you know, like I worked with some of my language consultants. They're like, well, I didn't grow up with the ku'ik. I don't know about it. I went to one and I got embarrassed because I was supposed to talk and I didn't know what to say. And so I didn't go back. And that was a very highly fluent Tlingit language speaker. And so we're going to have to sort of figure these things out. And again, coming back to the kids, like when you see the kids raised in some of these schools and stuff, like it could be they know, right? And they have these sort of connections. But then there's going to be aspects sometimes of the culture that need to be examined, that need to be looked at. Like one of the things that I looked at with Tlingit for a while, and I still look at is they'll say, well, it seems to me that there are more females than males that attend the classes, and good for the females, good. Our women need to like take control of the situation. But how do we get more males to come to the classes then? And then the other thing I saw is even though you had the ratio was probably 3 to 1 females, but the likelihood of becoming a speaker was much higher for the males. I was like, well, what are we doing? Are we doing something to sort of make it harder for females to become speakers? Is there some situation that's there? And sometimes those are things where the culture might need to shift. And those are difficult conversations to engage in. Just like, you know, in Hawaii, if someone was ili'i, they were like a noble person. And if you stood in their shadow, uh-oh, you gotta go get killed now. You that's kapu. You violated the cultural customs. Now you gotta die, right? So think cultures need to change. We're not tying people to big rocks at low tide anymore, and we're not killing slaves on top of glaciers and stuff. And so, but throughout, there are going to have to be these nuanced conversations. Just like that, the language is also going to have to change. And those are things that are going to make some people really mad. But how are you going to talk about electricity? Where's the water go when you flush the toilet? How are you going to talk about going out into outer space? Again, talk about going to Mars. I want that Mars little thing to be talking Tlingit to people when it's going around and see the Martians or whoever's up there, right? But you're going to have to expand this place, and it's going to be something that has to be strategic. So go do it.
I noticed that in Japanese, for concepts that are not traditionally Japanese, they'll make a choice. Like if it's a really cool concept, like electricity or a car or like a vending machine, it would be jidohan baiki, and they make their own word for it based on like the meaning. So a thing that sells things on its own. But then if something's like not as cool, like McDonald's, they'll just say it in katakana, which is an alphabet for saying foreign words. Like McDonald's would be makoto narudo. And so I feel like you can kind of do that too, I think, in any language.
Yeah, like you want to translate a video game, that's fine. You want to translate PlayStation 5? No, I'm not going to do that, right? But in one of the readings, we did talk about like, who is the authority? Who gets to say? Who gets to say? And this is an interesting concept, right? Like you want to come up with a word for ice skating. Okay, well, how does that work? And so these are some things to think about. So in Hawaii, they developed a lexicon committee, and we have tried that with Tlingit, but I don't think it's really taken off yet. But the idea is that there would probably be a small group of people, and you could contact them, and they would give you a thumbs up or thumbs down, or give you something really quick. Like if you, like, for example, you're teaching it, you need to say something. So it's like, okay, well, let's call it this. And then they would go back and have regular committee meetings, and then they would go over what they need new words for and new terms for. In every language, you're going to have to do that. If you really want it to be a language of daily use, then you're going to have to figure, and especially there's going to be a bunch of stuff too, where we used to know how to say that, but we don't know anymore. And we're going to have to really, as long as we're really students of the language and following the ways that the old people talked, then you're going to have to recreate it. 1 minute left. Anything else? What do you guys want to study on Wednesday? What do you want to learn how to do?
Raise money for that medium school.
I agree. That sounds good to me too. This is Sani. Let's go to Hawaii.
Oh, okay. So okay. Well, we'll see you on the beach. Well, first we'll go to we land at Kona, then we go to Kona Brewing Company, have a little pizza. We go up, we drive the north side, so but it's kind of nighttime, so maybe we'll. No, but yeah, let's figure that out. So let's get together. So Wednesday, I think what I'll do is I'll show you folks some basic things that I use to develop curriculum and some of the plans that, like what are the legislative things and the sort of systemic shifts that are being pushed for right now. And I'm going to go over some of those things and talk to you about what you can do and how this could impact your visions for language medium programs. Okay, great stuff. Thanks for sharing, everybody. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Finish cheese.
Cheese. See y'all again.
Cheese.
Cheese.
Get dogged in. Siagen.